Hello, dear viewers. Welcome to Midnight Dark Stories. The night is deep, the stars are hidden, and it's the perfect time for us to gather here and dive into the mysterious and thrilling world of tales. Prepare to be spellbound as we uncover the secrets that lie in the darkness. Let's begin this enchanting journey together. This took place around 2 years ago. I was driving to work a 5-hour drive. It was already dark about 3 hours of driving, and I started to get tired. So I bought myself a coffee and some snacks at a gas station, and I went on. But snacks and coffee can only keep you awake for so long, and I started to feel tired again. This part of the road was nothing but thick, dark pinwood forest around me. No other cars on the road. Nothing. Only insects smashing my windshield now and then, an empty road. I was now extremely tired, and at one point I even nearly drove off the road for almost falling asleep. I thought to myself that I have to sleep now and I can't wait for a gas station. I need to stop as soon as I see a place where I can park my car and just get something. When I'm tired too. I unfortunately fall asleep really fast. If I'm tired enough, I can fall asleep in the middle of a sentence, even when I'm talking. So it's a bit urgent for me to find a place where I can stop now. It felt like maybe an hour, but probably just like 5 minutes go by and I spot this little pocket in the road. It's like a parking space for quick stops like peeing, switching drivers or stuff like that. Not even a real resting area. But I stopped here, turned down my windows to check if I heard any weird noises, and there was total silence. So I wound up my windows again. I thought to myself that nothing bad was going to happen. I haven't seen a car for like 30 minutes. In fact, the road is empty, and if someone is checking out my car, I bet it's the cops checking on me if I'm alright. So I leave my keys in the ignition and I lock the doors just to be safe. I adjust my seat belt to make it more comfortable to sleep in. I take off my shoes and I put them on the passenger seat on the right. And let me tell you that it was so nice to close my eyes and instantly I fall asleep. I don't know why, but something wakes me up. I can't really see anything. Some kind of bright light hits me in the eyes. At first I thought that it was a flashlight, but then I realized it was the high beams from another car in my rearview mirror that was blinding me. I look at my left mirror and I see a dude walking up beside my cup. Maybe he wants help with something. Should I make it clear to him that I'm in here? He's right beside my left back door. Now should I step out and ask what he's doing? I didn't have to in the end, because the dude proceeds to jerk and pull on my left back door. I almost crapped my pants when I realized that he's trying to force his way into my car. My seat is adjusted for me to lay down and I push it back max. I can't reach the pedals, which makes it impossible for me to drive my car. But I slam the car horn and it breaks the silence with a roar and the dude jumps. That gives me like 2 seconds to push my seat to reach the pedals. But it's still way out of adjustment. So I'm kind of pulling myself to the steering wheel because my seat is laying flat and isn't supporting my back. But anyway, I quickly start my car and I drive off with a cloud of smoke from my screeching tires. It's actually quite surprising just how hard it is driving a car with nothing holding up your upper body. But I managed and I got out of there. As I leave, though, I look in the rearview mirror and I see how the dude stands there and just looks at me. And then I see 2 more guys coming up beside it. What I can make out, too, from the silhouette of their beams was that one of them has something in his hand like a wrench or a crowbar, or something. After that, I drove super fast way over the speed limit. My whole body was trembling with adrenaline and fear, and I drove like that for like 30 minutes. Then I stopped at the gas station to fix my seat and put my shoes on again. I figured out too, that I must have been only sleeping for like 10 minutes max. And well, after that I didn't have to sleep until I got to my destination, which is surrounded by heavy-duty fencing, and the building has an alarm. I told my boss the next day as well, And he said that they actually have problems with what we call it in Sweden road pirates, criminals that force you to stop on the road and rob you of everything, including a car sometimes. And apparently that specific area is known for it. I'm not saying that it was that. I mean, it could have just been three nice guys that wanted to check if I was okay. But then why didn't they just knock on my driver's window? The thing in his hand could have just been a big flashlight, I suppose. But still, I think I dodged a bullet with that one. A few months back, I went on a date with a guy who seemed familiar to me. But I just couldn't put my finger on where I'd seen him before. I assumed that I might have met him on a night out or something. It was a last-minute thing, though, and I told him how I wasn't looking for anything, but it would be nice to hang out, and that was a mistake. When I met him at first, he seemed like an alright guy, but things quickly turned when we got to a restaurant. He didn't order, but I did, and he started saying things about loving my curves and my body. I laughed it off, but I thought that he was being a bit too forward. He could have put it nicely or kept that to himself, while having my food. He began telling me about how I was different from other girls, because they don't give nice guys like him a chance. Red flags were immediately going off, so I came up with the story that I could only be out for a little bit because my parents wanted me to dog it and stuff like that. He bought it, but then proceeded to stare at my breast and say things about how he wished he could see me without cloth on, even saying that I should send him a picture. I told him that I don't do that and that he was making me uncomfortable. He stopped, but then told me how he brought me a gift. He pulled out of his bag a bouquet of roses, which I did think was actually quite sweet, and a bag of Tesco prawns. That confused me, and honestly, I just kind of burst out laughing. I asked why he got them, and he said that he knew that I liked timber and prawns. But the thing is that I never once told him that I did so. Alarm bells were definitely going off again. My head was now telling me to run, but I didn't want to be rude, so I stayed until the time that I said I would, and after that I left, so I had less than an hour left. He kept talking to me, but he actually started to scare me because he started guessing aspects of my life like uncannily, like the school that I went to, what I was like as a kid, what I'm currently doing. He just got every part right. It scared me because, well, I haven't told him any of this, and I haven't posted any of this online. So I backed away and asked him how he knew all of that. It turns out that his mother was actually one of my teachers in school, and he asked her everything that she knew about me, and looked online for anything about me. Currently, I don't know when he asked her, but at this point I definitely wanted to get out of there and thank God for my mom. Not long after, I got a text from my mom asking how things were. He didn't see the text but saw that it was my mom, and I just said, "Oh my goodness. My mom and dad got the times wrong for the pictures, so I have to go home now for my dog. I'm so sorry." The guy just accepted that and then started to walk me home. I said something about only going about halfway because I'm not comfortable with people knowing where I stay. But he then started insisting, and he then dropped the bombshell that he knew that I stayed on X Road but didn't know which house was mine. I told him that was really weird and that it creeped me out, that he knew that. He claimed that I told him, but I never tell people that. So I started to walk to the main road for my own safety, but he then grabbed my hand and said that he knew a shortcut. I was getting really scared when he stopped and shoved his tongue down my throat. I shoved him away and told him to stop it, and he apologized. That's when I noticed a stranger walking a dog coming. So I used that as an opportunity and said that I needed to go, and I went to the main road. I thought that I was safe, honestly, but I wasn't. The guy kept walking with me, and I stopped and told him that I wanted to part ways here and how it was nice to meet him again. He then looked confused and said that we had never met. He said something about meeting on a night out just to get me to come with him, and I then began saying, look, I have to go. When he cut me off, grabbed me and pulled me near some bushes, saying, "Before you go, there's one more thing." I told him that I needed to go and let go of me, but he just ignored me. The guy then pulled me in, hurting my wrist, and kissed me again. He saw the bushes and said about having privacy, and I managed to shove him off and tell him no. He then grabbed me again and tried to take me to the bushes, saying it'll only take a second. While I resisted, some dog walkers came by and he stopped and pulled me to kiss me again. But this time he grabbed my breast and I shoved and screamed. I said no and just ran. My heart was racing and I was terrified. I thought that he might have tried to do something to me. I kept looking back, but he was nowhere to be seen. I ended up taking the long way home just in case that night. And when I got in, I just started to cry because I thought something bad was going to happen to me. When I got a message from another account, because it was him, he said about how lovely it was meeting me and how it was the best date ever. How I was the prettiest girl that he'd ever kissed and that he would love to see me again. Adding how he hoped that I had a lovely time too, and that he showed that he was a gentleman. Then adding that he was now on my road. I just hit on the floor for the rest of the day after that, and when I looked at his profile, I actually remembered where I'd seen him before. At that moment he used to message my old Facebook account years ago with weird messages and creepy edits, saying how he liked me. This whole event happened within an hour and a half, but boy did it feel a lot longer than that. So I was vacuuming my house at 9:30 p.m. with my music playing, when I get a knock on my door. My boyfriend was at work and I was not expecting company, especially so late at night. So I turned my music down and realized that the door is actually not locked. Instantly I'm terrified. I mean, I'm only 410. So I had to prop myself up to the wall to look through the peephole, and I carefully locked the door, more pounding. And the man outside my door is no one that I recognize and looks kind of disgruntled, dirty, and quite frightening. He was short and stocky and looked angry. He grew frustrated, knowing that I just turned my music down. He heard me lock the door and started calling out, "Ma'am." More knocking. "Excuse me, ma'am." But how did he know that I was a woman? I looked around the room to see my blinds were open and realized that he must have been watching me vacuum. Thankfully, my neighbors right across from me opened the doors and the husband asked, "Hey, excuse me, who are you and what are you doing?" Startled. Now the creep fumbles and says, "Oh, good evening, sir. I was just going to offer my carpet cleaning services to her." The husband goes, "That's great, buddy. She doesn't want it. You need to leave right now." And the creep left. Promptly afterwards, I called the police, my boyfriend, and closed up my blinds, and texted the neighbors to thank them for scaring them away. I paid extra to live on the top floor as well, but it seems that this creep must have been watching me from below. This story takes place during my senior year of high school, when I still lived at home with my mom. It was a Saturday, so I slept in, as any teenager does, in my mom. She left for work early that morning, so I spent my day at home alone. I decided to do some cleaning around the house when I realized that we were out of paper towels, so I went down to the garage to get them. That's where we kept extra things. My mom lives in a 3-story townhouse, where the main floor is actually on the second floor, and the first floor is just a small entryway at the bottom of the stairs into doors. One of them is the front door and the other leads to the garage. So I walked down the stairs and opened the door to the garage, going to flip on the lights but realizing that I didn't need to because the garage door was wide open and letting a lot of daylight. Now, maybe to some this would be no big deal, but my mom lives in a not great part of town and is adamant about closing the garage door when she leaves. I remember feeling weird too about it, since it was so unusual, but chalked it up to my mom just not realizing it. Or maybe something had rolled under the door, so the automatic sensor kept it from closing completely and she drove away without realizing. I looked over into the dark corner of the garage where the boxes were stacked and the paper towels were stored. For some reason I couldn't get myself to walk over there and grab them. I do have a slight fear of the dark, so I figured that was what was causing my sudden hesitation. So I just kinda stood there in the doorway and pressed the garage door button on the wall and watched it close completely. I made sure nothing blocked it from closing, and I waited a good 10 seconds before leaving to make sure that it was really shut. This time I switched off the light, walked back inside, and locked the garage door. It took maybe 2 steps up the stairs before I heard boxes trembling at feet and the audible sound of someone hitting their hand against the garage door opener, and then the mechanical sound of the garage door opening. And I headed up the rest of the flight of stairs. Then just stood at the top step for probably 20 minutes, just kind of shaking. It wasn't until my mom got home asking me why the garage door was open that I went back down there, and other than my mom's car now, in the garage it was complete. Completely empty. Except for the boxes in the corner where we store extra things for the house. I looked and saw that the boxes were toppled over. I had to explain to my mom the situation, and I'm so glad that my gut told me not to go into that dark corner of my garage, and to whoever decided to creep in there, please never come back. So when I was 13, I had not long broken up with this girl who supposedly had a psycho family. But one of this girl's family was a close friend who was supposedly obsessed with her. I was invited out with my friends after school one day, and this boy latched on. Everybody told me to come out, and that he wanted to make amends, and he understood why I did what I did, etc. Being the pushover that I am, I went out and we hung out in the parks and smoked and drank and whatnot. As it started to get dark, I decided to go home, and I felt uneasy about being around him, and he started acting all weird, talking about fights that he'd been in and bragging about bashing some guy's face to him with his fists in school. And so, because I didn't feel safe whatsoever, I just left now. The next day, my best friend and all the other kids that were out that night came into school and told me that it got worse after I left. Apparently after they had drunk some more, he started waving this huge kitchen knife around. It was telling everybody how he was going to stab me in the stomach for breaking that girl's heart. Let me point out, too, that I only know the details of this because I have a relative in the local police force. In the end, my dad made us move too, because he actually knew where I lived. I continued getting death threats on social media, though, until about a year or two later. When it was in the paper, it was spread around town that he had broken into somebody's house and stabbed him to death and then slit his wrists in the man's bathtub. They found high amounts of cocaine and cannabis in his system, along with a lot of alcohol. The elderly neighbors phoned the police when they heard some commotion, and they hadn't seen the man leave for work that day, and they found him barely conscious, and he's now on a Psych W. This was also sadly over this girl again. Anyway, I think that I dodged a big bullet there. I have a handful of little encounters that I just can't explain, starting from when I was around 7. Even so, the earliest one I could remember is waking up in the middle of the night and seeing a rapidly fading hand on my shoulder. I remember feeling something heavy on my shoulder, and when I turned around, I saw the faint image of a hand resting on my shoulder, as though someone was actually standing behind me, even though I was laying on my back. I turned my bedside lamp on, and I sat up staring around my room for a long time before eventually just falling asleep with the light on. The next one was about a year or so later. I think maybe more, I can't be sure. But I was lying in bed trying to sleep, and I remember feeling something tugging at my blanket from the foot of my bed. It was hard enough that I kept sitting up and turning my lamp on to see if anyone was there. I even looked under my bed at one point. After I'd sat up for about half an hour staring at the end of my bed, I lay back down, and as soon as I did, as I turned the light off, I felt the tug again. I woke my dad up, and he slept in my bed that night while I slept next to my mom, and he said that he slept fine. The next one, nothing physically happened, but for some reason I just couldn't shake the feeling, like I felt like someone was in my room. The room just seemed small and dense and crowded, even though I was the only one in. It bothered me enough that I told my mom, and she smudged my room and sat with me for a while. The next was about a week after that. It was a warm night, so I had my window open, and I woke up and there were just a lot of furs in my room. So I got up and closed my window, and when I sat back on my bed, the window was a little bit open again. I stared at it in case it moved again, and it actually started to move open again on its own. It moved up another inch or so by itself, and at that point I ran out of my room and slept next to my parents. After that two things started to pick up a little. I had a big plush wolf that my brother actually wanted a fair at one point, and it sat in my room against the wall farthest from my bed, a good 6 ft or so away. I woke up one morning at dawn and the wolf was now at the foot of my bed when I was laying down to. I could just see its beady little eyes poking over the top of the quilt, and I still don't know how it moved across my room like that. But it scared me so bad that my mom gave it to Goodwill that afternoon because she just refused to have it in the house another time too. I was sleeping on the couch in the living room while Mom was busy with something. I slept there for 3 days and every night I would feel someone walking past me. I pretended to be asleep, but I narrowly opened my eyes and could never see anymore, even though I'm sure that I could feel someone there. But one night the video recorder kept turning on by itself too, and I turned it back off and it would turn back on again. But the last thing I encountered was another sleep one, and it was when I was about 19. I still remember the dream too, because I was walking over from my elementary school and was being followed by someone, but they were always just too far away to make out any features. I made it back to my house and nobody was home. In my dream, I laid down on the couch and then the whole house was just engulfed in flames and the guy who followed me home was standing in the fire. I woke up really abruptly to this and I saw the head and shoulders of an oldish man standing over my bed. It took maybe 15 seconds or so before it faded, but it was vivid enough that I actually said, "Who's there?" out loud. I know that it wasn't sleep paralysis too, because I could definitely move. Nothing ever happened after that, and I've moved out now. A few years after I moved out, though, they pulled up the carpet in my brother's room and found what looked like the ruins of a wine cellar under a trapdoor in the floor. But it had a little box of curious things from the 50s and the 60s in it and some scraps of comic strips. Like it was used as a cubby at some point anyway. I never found any more information on it, but I'll never forget those nights that I was living there. So this happened when I was in high school several decades ago. At the time I had zero interest in anything paranormal. I was heavy into science and all things logical really. And anyway, in the 11th grade I switched high schools to one closer to home. On the second or third day there a student walked up to me that I didn't know and introduced himself. I was new and he was called cool to me, so we made friends right away. So we started hanging out, me and his other friend, who was also a nice guy. We were kids just doing normal teenager stuff, but one evening, while hanging out at my friend's house and listening to some music, he told me that he knew that I was coming to their school. Intrigued, I asked how he knew that, and he said that their YA board told him that I was coming. I asked how long ago. I told them that, and even though I don't remember his exact reply, I remember that it was longer than even I knew that I was going to change schools, which was OD. But naturally I'm in complete disbelief about any of this YA board nonsense and even told him that. So him and his friend pulled it out and started using it in front of me. Now understand that they're sitting on this bed using it. I'm on the other side of the room sitting down and he asks me to ask it something. So determined to show them just how silly this YA board nonsense was, I began asking it questions that these two would absolutely have no way of knowing. They were deeply specific things about my family, dates, names, places, etc. This was before the internet as well, and these were just normal teenagers like myself. So I know that they didn't know this information, since I wasn't even close to it. and they were the ones touching it. I thought that I would totally trip it up, but to my astonishment, it actually answered every single question that I posed to it with one accuracy, which, let me tell you, was absolutely impossible. My friends kept looking up at me when it would answer to gauge my reaction, and I remember getting goosebumps just all over my body. I couldn't believe that this was actually happening, but somehow there was something behind that device that knew just all that stuff about me. To this day, I still wonder about it and what it was, how it knew, especially how it knew that I would change schools before even I did. To this day, I still won't allow one in my house. I don't know what force is behind them, but I think it's for the best to just leave them alone. This happened about a week ago. I was going to a Gothic fair in a place that I didn't really know well, but it was in my city, so I thought that I was going to be okay. Now for context. Yes, I'm a 20-year-old woman. Walking alone sounds like an easy target. I know, but this happened at 4 p.m. in the middle of summer. It was broad daylight, and even though it wasn't crowded, there were definitely people around. So I got out of the subway and I started checking my phone for directions. But I quickly put it away in my bag so I don't look distracted or get it taken from my hands and stuff. I had actually had a phone stall, and that way before I started walking while checking the street names and numbers, when a couple, and they must have been around 35 years old, approached me and asked for directions. I told them that I was lost too, and they said that they weren't from here either and asked where I lived. I'm not stupid, so I gave them some sort of a vague answer and then I left. But 2 minutes after that, they approached me again and told me where the fair that I was located. And I said thanks, and I started walking that way as I walk. They followed me and tried to start a conversation. I tried to walk faster and leave them behind, because I don't trust strangers, but they just kept going with me at some point too. The conversation, it was only the man talking to me, shifted to jobs and occupations. And the man said I have a job, but most of the time it isn't enough, so I have to do what I do usually. I'm not violent, but I have a gun to use with dumb people who scream or make a scene. And then said, now show me if you value more your life or material things. He obviously expected me to hand my bag over, but I know that this is going to sound so edgy, but I'm deeply depressed and my train of thought went straight to, I either hand over my hard work for money that I was excited to spend in nice things today, or I finally die. I acted calm, although my heart was beating fast and I was sweating. I didn't scream. I didn't hand over my stuff either, and instead I just took my bottle of water and took a sip. And then I just kept walking, thinking that it wouldn't be all too bad to get shot and die there. And they just kind of stood there confused. And after a while they left. In the end too, I ended up going to the fair and I had a nice time. So I used to live in the southwest corner of Missouri, in an old railroad town that had quite a few missing people here and there, mostly due to a high TWE population. I lived in what we call the holler, at the bottom of the tops of 2 enormous hills. A creek also ran through the holler, but was mostly dry throughout the year. Despite it being dry, though, living in what was basically a ravine makes the land in the hills damp and also misty, which meant that the woods surrounding a trailer were perpetually green year-round and also thick. You could walk in one direction for 10 minutes and get lost pretty easily. Generally speaking, we kids used the creek bed for a path, as there were flat rocks along it that were easier to navigate than the viney lush forest floor. Now, one day in the middle of summer, I decided to go for a walk in the woods. As usual, our red-nosed pit bull Fatty came along and the sun would be setting soon, but I was home alone a lot of that time, so there was no one around to tell me not to go. I figured that I had enough time before sunset to walk a certain point and back. It was 7:30 and the sunset around 9 at that point in the summer, but the minute that I started taking it throughout the creek bed, my pit bull started whining really weirdly. He didn't leave my side once, but was definitely reluctant to follow, stopping here and there to smell the air, looking behind us, and I figured that maybe there was an animal in the area, so I didn't worry too much. There was a point in the creek bed, though, that I had to duck under to fallen reeds. It made a sort of bridge in the middle of the creek and acted as a turnaround point for most of my walks. My dog was still whining, and I began to wonder if there was a cougar or even a bear in the area, but for some reason I wanted to just keep walking. I ducked under the trees, shushed Fatty, and stopped to listen to the woods surrounding us. I heard nothing. I heard literally nothing. No wind, no snapping twigs, not even any birds, which was kind of weird. Even on calm days with no wind. Those woods were usually teeming with sounds of life, and nothing was ever still. But all of a sudden now it was. It also made my stomach feel like I was dropping down into a pit. Then I began to feel really weird. I can't really describe it, but it was kind of a gut feeling when suddenly my body felt very queasy and oversensitive, and worse. I had the distinct feeling that now I was being watched. I have felt similar feelings when being watched by a bear at some point, and it's always really weird, but something just tells you to get the hell out of Dodge when there's a huge animal nearby. Humans are animals, after all, and we also get those instincts. And every time that I had experienced an animal that could potentially hurt me in the woods, I had immediately turned around and gone home. But my dog had always alerted me by barking or growling, but for some reason, not this time. Instead, Fatty was scared and trembling now. I'd seen this dog get hit by a truck before and get up like nothing had happened, and this time he was terrified. All signs were pointing to leading right. But no, another weird thing happened. Call it an edgy teenager or anything you want, but I felt this strange pull into the woods. There was no sound, but I felt like something was calling me, luring me deeper into the woods. It was the worst part of that day, and also the creepiest thing that I had ever felt. But I was also curious, so I wanted to know what the hell wanted me to wander further ahead. I walked forward, aware that my dog had firmly planted himself at the fallen trees. He was shaking all over, and he led at me as I walked away. But he didn't come with me. He also didn't leave, which I believe potentially saved my ass that day. But I left Fatty behind and eventually got to the part of the creek that I had never been to. It was a clearing with a ring of trees surrounding it, with the creek stretching far ahead and going around an unseen corner. But the sun hadn't moved and it was still silent. I stood in place for maybe a minute, I think, and considered turning around. The clearing was creepy and felt kind of devoid of everything. I can't really explain it well enough, but I felt like if I walked around that corner, which was about 1 FT away, that something terrible was about to happen. It felt like something was just waiting for me to walk into it, unsuspecting. In the end, I brushed it off as paranoia. I had plenty of sunlight left and I could explore alone for once. And besides, if something was drawing me further in, then it's also possible that I might find something amazing. So I took a couple of more steps and suddenly I heard my dog yelping frantically behind me, startled. I turned around quickly, my dog looking like a little white speck far back into the trees. He was pacing back and forth at his spot and barking like it was going to kill him if he didn't take off running. He kept lunging forward but wouldn't move any distance forward. That was when I realized that something was just very wrong. I turned around again to look back at the clearing, and all of a sudden it was pitch black outside. Like seconds ago. The sun wasn't even close to going down below the horizon, and all of a sudden now the stars were out. No sun. No light. I stared hard at the trees around the corner, seeing nothing but elongated shadows. I heard a twig snap when all of a sudden, my ears just started to ring and panic flooded my entire body. I whipped around and shot back towards the fallen trees, sprinting towards my dog. He was snarling and barking like mad, and when I ducked under the trees, both of us sprinted back towards the house the entire time. I honestly felt like death was on my heels, and Fatty never once ran ahead of me, staying right at my side the entire way back. When we eventually made it back home, I quickly checked the clock, and during the walk, that usually took about 10 minutes, I would say I had been gone for 3 hours. I had left my home at 7:30, and now it was 10:30, which meant that my parents were home in an hour. The next day I walked only part way back to where I could see the clearing. The very farthest that I could walk was about 2 miles, and so that meant that it took me 3 hours to walk there and back to this day. I have never felt so proud upon in the woods as well. These woods weren't part of a national park or anything, but if you walked about 10 miles or so you could reach Mark Twain National Park, and people go missing there quite often, seeing as the woods can be impossible to navigate after dark, and as large hollows in the middle of the woods that people go rolling into and they get stuck as well. I don't know what wanted me in that woods that day. I didn't see what it was and it didn't say anything, but I ignored everything. Natural instinct that I had to run until it was almost too late. My dog being there may have just been the reason to that I didn't want to deeper into the woods of the Missouri and succumb to someone or something in that dark place. I've never told anyone in my walking life about this. And what do you guys think? Have any of you guys heard of the 411 cases involving Missouri woods and hollers and whatnot? Or do any of you guys have any similar experiences? If you're from this area, just down the road from where, a few years ago, I had previously lived in Southeast Australia, is the opening into about 1 acre of woodland and bush that I frequently went into when I was younger to do the usual things like riding and camping. Now I was out driving at around 11:30 p.m. with my girlfriend, and, as we were in the area, decided to show her the woodlands while we were in the area. As she loves everything to do with nature, and it was summer, so an extremely warm night. I left my car with the light shining into the trees as we weren't going too far, and it was pitch black inside, and the two of us just kind of sat chatting anyway, having a smoke and generally relaxing. She was sitting on a sort of map of the area that had been put into some plastic, and I was keeping an eye on the trees as for some reason I had a feeling that something was just not quite right. I've heard a few people say that they felt that they were in danger, although nothing around them was off, and it was kind of like that feeling. Every sense was almost reaching out and my adrenaline was up, but there wasn't really anything in my eyeline that seemed any different. After lighting another cigarette to calm my nerves, I scanned the tree line again and realized that it looked different to before. It was only after staring in the dark that I saw that there was moonlight now lighting up the grass where it couldn't before, as there was a black shape blocking it. That before I thought was a tree. Now, the only way I can describe the next part is that all the sound just kind of ceased and everything, and I mean literally everything, went dead silent. And a few seconds later, this disgusting feeling of dread just fell over me, and I saw motion in the dark of the path as this thing crawled toward us on all fours. Now, I've seen nearly every animal in the outback here, and I can assure you that we don't have any large predators like in the US or Europe. But somehow I knew that this thing was a predator, and it wasn't hiding itself from us, but was just kind of slowly crawling towards us. I don't know if my girlfriend saw it or not, as I couldn't look away, but just as it reached the line where my car lights were able to illuminate, it reared up onto 2 legs and just sat there staring at us. So I'm 6'4", but this thing was about another meter larger than me, at least, with arms that were just far too long, that reached down near the ground, and all I could make out was a sort of off-white, almost yellowish, fur on it. In the dim light, could make out the silhouette of its head as like a dog or a wolf. Maybe I wasn't able to move as it stared at me, but it was at this point that my girlfriend gasped, which seemed to break. Whatever was stinking, whatever was stopping me from thinking. Logically, I grabbed her by the arm and we sprinted to my car, slammed the doors and tore out of there as fast as I could. Both of us too, scared to speak until about a half an hour later. We've both discussed it many times, and the feeling that we had was what I imagine a rabbit sees when it catches a wolf or a fox looking at it. But this is something that would be able to end us with absolute tease if it chose to. Neither of us have been able to come up with any explanation for what it was. But it's definitely changed the way that I view the woods and the bush here, and when I go camping or hiking now, I think back to that and wonder what it was and if I'll ever see anything like it again. So it's been about a year since my last story, I suppose. And I visit this place every now and then to listen to other people's stories, but haven't had much interest in contributing any of my own. The stories that I have shared were mainly for entertainment. What I mean is that I could recount the events with ease, because they virtually meant nothing to me, just interesting stories to tell you know. However, what I'm about to share is not something many of my closest friends or even family know about. The events that happened to me were well traumatic. The effects have cemented in the way that I think view people and my ability to trust or lack thereof. I'm afraid to admit that this is not a story in which I showed immense courage or resilience or anything. Instead, I just kind of buried these memories deep until more recently. This is a pretty messed up encounter story that is about a truly sick man. The kind you hear about on TV or podcast or something. The kind of evil man who managed to build something of himself despite his unnatural desires, only to use his wealth and resources to further manipulate and take advantage of kids. So a little bit of background. I grew up in a very poor part of New England, a Hispanic-dominated area. The city is pretty small and has always been a conundrum to me, really. But the city is known for its drugs use and violence. It was once a prospering mill city, one where immigrants came to work and secure their own slice of the American dream. The city, much of its residents, have disintegrated like the stones that make up the massive factories that loom over the city. The conundrum I speak of is, while this city remains open to criminal activity, the surrounding towns are just doing great. Less than 10 mil north, you men to New Hampshire, where things are generally quiet. And south, you'll pass through multiple rich and thriving towns, and the man that I'll introduce later would come down from New Hampshire to prey on the poor kids from my community. So I was maybe 13 years old. I think it was definitely summertime, because I remember the heat. It was a fun summer, though my friends and I were outside all the time, and while none of us had a car, we made the most of walking where we needed to go. And I was a bit younger than the guys that I was hanging out with at the time, so they were always able to kind of stay out later than me. It's funny how everything that happens while you're not there feels like you've missed out on the best stuff anyway. But one day, while we're all just kind of hanging around, a friend of him mentions, "Hey, maybe we can get Ryan to come by and buy us some food." Always feeling left out. I acted as if I knew who Ryan was the whole time, thinking that he was a teenager, perhaps in his early 20s. I suppose I let the conversation go on for a bit before I could not resist, and I asked, "Who's Ryan?" The response I got drove me crazy, because it only furthered my frustration of not totally feeling like I was a part of the game. "You don't know who Ryan is? We've been working for him for a few weeks now. He owns a junkyard, and we go and strip cars, log spare parts, and just mess around. Really, we get him to buy our stuff, and he lets us drive his cars." I thought, how could this be? I felt so embarrassed and betrayed that all my friends apparently had a job and we going to eat and drive cars, and I was just finding out about it, so wanting to fit in. I urged them to get me a job too. My friend Eli, a leading figure in our group, pulls out his cell phone and gives this Ryan guy a call. But the way Eli was talking to him made it seem like Eli was in control, like he was bullying Ryan or something. He spoke to him aggressively and told him that we were hungry and for him to come and pick us up and buy us some food. And Ryan agreed. Shortly after this, the man pulls up in his red pickup with a tow in the back and his company logo on the side of the truck. He was a white man, mid-40s, short and kind of chubby. He had a high-pitched voice that screeched out when he would laugh. And when he arrived, he immediately turned to Eli and started talking to him, making fun of him, letting out a bit of a laugh. It weirdly made me feel at ease too, because it just wasn't the way I expected an adult to act. It was kind of like it was one of us and you were, and if you were cool with him. Eli introduced me to him and told him that I want to work. He examined me and asked if I knew anything about cars. I told him that I didn't. He agreed that we'd talk about it over lunch. He told us all to jump into his truck and asked me to sit in the front seat so that we could talk. I remember that drive like it was yesterday. We were listening to the radio, and I could see that it was singing underneath his breath. So I purposely started singing the song out loud, acting as if I didn't know that he was also singing. He noticed and turned the music up, looked at me, and started singing loudly. We did this the whole ride until arriving in an Italian place, and the food was amazing. I had only ever been out to eat a handful of times at this stage, and none of them were with friends ordering whatever we wanted and goofing off the whole time. It was a real treat and only really made me want to be in with Ryan even more. It was clear that he played favorites and those who he liked received more gifts, and at the end of lunch he agreed to give me a job and made Eli agree to let me know the next time that we had to work. The next month or so felt like I was having the best summer of my life. Ryan owned a junkyard in New Hampshire and also had a car rental service. He was expanding his business, so there was a ton of construction going on. His office was in a construction trailer outside the yard. This is where you would find him if you needed anything. He would pick us up in the morning and bring us to the yard, and for 8 hours we would honestly just kind of mess around, walk to the very end of the yard, and hide out in cars. We would take naps and scavenge through the hundreds of cars hoping to find valuables. And occasionally we would actually have to work. But even then we would mess around a lot. And all the while we were getting paid not a ton in retro respect, but more than any of us had ever received. But more than the pay, what we really wanted was our own car. He easily had 30 of them, not including the cars that he rented. Each car was in fair shape, and each day he would throw Eli a different set of keys, and it really made the rest of us jealous. You see, Ryan didn't really care if you had a license or not, and Eli didn't, and he drove a different car pretty much every day. I personally had my eye on a Mazda sedan. I wanted the car so bad when I approached Ryan that I nearly begged him for it. He agreed that we would talk about it at the end of the day, and I spent the whole day just kind of imagining my life with that car. How cool I would look. Pulling up to places, getting girls' attention, and a car at the time was like entering a new world, and I just might have won. At the end of the day. The end of the day came, and he threw Eli some keys and told him to bring everyone home except for me. This wasn't alarming to anyone, because all I could think about the whole day was how he was going to give me that car. After everyone left and the sun was setting, Ryan asked me to talk in his trailer. He started with how kids are always coming and going, trying to take advantage of him, stealing from him, and explaining how ungrateful people are to his generosity. And I strangely felt like he was speaking about me, but kind of indirectly. He asked me a lot of questions about drug use. Are you on drugs? Have you ever taken any? How do I know that I can trust you? How do I know if you'll pay me back and just not ruin my car and never give me a dime? My response to all of it was no. I would thoroughly work off what I owed for the car. And he then asked if I had anything in my pockets. I said no and willingly turned them out. And then he said, do you really think that I'm that stupid like you would hide stuff in your pockets? I know that you're hiding things in your clothes. I had no warning bells ringing, because a lot of what he was saying was true. We all stole from him whenever we could get away with it. We all thought that we were in control and kind of using him. It's an amazing thing how someone can get you to do something and to do it on your own accord. We feel like it was your idea. No matter what I said, though, he just kept repeating, I know you have something. I know you do, ensuring him that I don't. I would move my shirt around and pull on my waistband. It wasn't taking. He just kept repeating that he doesn't make deals with thieves. And then I got the idea. painfully in retrospect, that I'll just take my stuff off. Show this guy that I don't have anything. So standing there with most of my stuff off at this point, I took off my pants and I stood there in triumph thinking, you see, I don't have anything, with only my boxes on. I started to kind of jokingly dance because I thought that I had one. I don't have anything after all. But then Ryan said, take off your boxes. I was really confused by this, and I was like, what, I don't have anything? Why does this guy not believe me? Ryan just sat behind his desk and told me again to take my boxes off, and I was frozen. And even though I hadn't said the words, I knew that I was alone at this point, far away from home, and confusion just took over my mind. I didn't have any thoughts. Really just kind of frozen. And he leaned forward and said, are you going to make me go over there and take them off for you? It's weird how I still did not think that I was being taken advantage of. Honestly, my brain still thought that this guy really thinks that I stole something. And I actually remember thinking to myself, what the could I hide in my boxes? I said to him again that I don't have anything. And well, he completely dropped the whole stealing bit and then just said straight out, I want to see your dick, pull it out at this point. I didn't know what to do. It really sucks that you don't have any options to freeze time. Actually think about what's happening. And instead you're forced to make a choice as fast as you can choose the words while having a conversation. My brain went into survival mode, though, and that mode was to not look at the situation for what it actually was. I did what he asked, choosing to believe that it wasn't a big deal. He just sat there and looked at me, and honestly, thank God, that's all that he did. I began to shake and I grabbed my clothes, and he snapped out of whatever world that he was in and started moving things around on his desk, looking in drawers, and I couldn't meet his eyes, because I was ashamed and confused. He eventually spoke and said something like, don't crash it, as he threw the keys to the Mozzie, and I caught the keys and left, trying really hard not to think about what had just happened. I didn't want to face it, and that's why, when I got home, I just chose not to say anything. My father, who I sure would have killed him. I was embarrassed to tell him, knowing he would think, why would you do that? Why didn't you fight? I raised you to be tough. Why would you do that? And so in the end I just showed up. Like any other night, except this time, I had my own car. Now I clearly did not think things through, because I was like 14 and I just came home with a car. My parents were pissed and they told me to call one of my friends and have them pick the car up. And they also said that I couldn't work there anymore. To be honest, though, I wasn't upset. The next day I told Eli that I was quitting and asked if he could pick up my last day. He tried to convince me not to quit, but I stuck to my parents being adamant on my quitting. And Eli would call me a few days later and tell me that Ryan wouldn't give me what he owed me. Instead, I had to get it myself. I never tried to get the money, because I just couldn't face it. Fast forward a few months, though, and I was with some of those guys, and my friend Joe said something, hey guys, did Ryan ever ask you to show him your dick? And to my surprise, everyone said yes, but they all said that they didn't do it. I lied to them all and made up some story where I freaked out and threatened him. And over the years I found out that all of the kids did it. There were 8 of us. One kid did it with his mom waiting outside in her car to pick him up. In fact, not sure if Ryan knew that she was outside, but the kid just never said anything. We all just kind of buried it. We were if guys or wanted to be, and no one wanted to remember that. Fast forward again. 7 or 8 years this time, and I was 22 or 23. And I knew a friend who was struggling to get work. Tells me that he landed a job at a junkyard in New Hampshire. Except the guy who owns it asked him to get naked and show him his dick. And my mind nearly blew up. By then I had grappled a bit with it and developed anger. And I freaked out. Asked him to tell me everything. And he said that he's known to pick people up for work. And after a couple of days of working, He invited my friend Joe into his trailer and basically did something that he did to me. What actually really disappointed me, though, was that my friend, who was in his 20s, actually did. And even now I understand the craziness of the request and how he's able to get you to do it. But I so badly wish that Joe acted the way that I wish I did, knocking this guy's teeth down his throat. What's even crazier, though, is that while he was telling me, this girlfriend that we both had overheard, and says, "Are you guys talking about creepy Ryan?" And again my mind just blows up. She tells us that he's apparently got multiple people over the years and he can't be touched. That people have tried. But he does tow work for the city and PD of that town and has since made connections. Now, I don't know the details of these reports, whether or not investigations were underway, but people told the truth and he was still out there doing what he wanted. And while hearing that he was still out there was truly shocking. My thoughts on him ended with that drunk conversation. Fast forward another 3 years, I was 26 or so. I was out after a night of bar hopping and a couple at night decided to get chicken at a late night spot. Everyone goes to after the beat close, and while I was there I was approached by a guy who recognized me. I didn't recognize him at first, but then realized that it was an old friend, Brandon. We were friends at that time and we both worked for him. Last I heard he had a bad heroin addiction, and the rumors were certainly true, because I could barely recognize him. He was happy to see me, though, and asked if I could spare a few bucks or a cigarette. Then asked if I could give him a ride to where he was staying. Brandon said that he was a band and needed to get back up with his friend in NH, and I really didn't want to, but he was insistent and wouldn't stop asking, despite my body language and what I assumed was a distasteful look on my face as well. But in the end I agreed I needed to get my car, so I took his number down and told him that I would call him. When I was outside, he didn't believe me and kept begging that I don't ditch him, and honestly, looking back, I kind of wish that I did so. While we were driving, I was contemplating how Brandon was going to kill me, trying to drive alert just in case he tried anything crazy. I was aggravated because I didn't want to do this and realizing more and more that we were never really friends, that I barely knew him years ago, that he was pretty much a stranger. I didn't like where this was going. But on the road he tells me to take a left and I get a really weird, familiar sense of where we were, and I asked, "Hey, where is your friend's place?" Brandon replies, "Did you ever meet Ryan?" And honestly, every time I heard that guy's name, my mind just blew up. I literally shouted out, "Wait, what, you're staying with Ryan? That guy's a piece of pedophile who takes advantage of kids. What the are you doing there?" I assumed that guy I was in prison already. Thank you so much for joining me in the world of Midnight Dark Stories. I hope these tales have sent shivers down your spine and sparked your imagination. Remember to subscribe, like, opinions, and share your scariest thoughts in the comments. Until the next time we meet in the darkness, keep the thrill alive.